I'm sorry the Cowan family did not get justice, and I was a part of their not getting justice." These words haunt the halls of Oregon law enforcement, whispered by an officer who carried the weight of an unsolved massacre for decades. A case that began with a simple Labor Day weekend camping trip. A father, a mother, a 5-year-old boy, and a baby girl just 5 months old. The morning started like any other at Carberry Creek. Richard Cowan and his young son David walked into the local general store, picked up some milk, and vanished. Back at their campsite, Belinda waited with baby Melissa, unaware these would be their final hours. What transformed this ordinary September morning into Oregon's most devastating family tragedy remains wrapped in shadow. That same morning, Frederick's wife, Mabel Humvig. Their abandoned campsite told a story that didn't make sense. A father's Rolex watch left untouched, a mother's purse undisturbed, keys to their truck sitting in plain view, a half-edged carton of fresh milk on the picnic table, as if the family had stepped away for just a moment. But moments turned to hours, hours to days, and days to months of desperate searching. When the truth finally emerged 7 months later, it revealed horrors beyond imagination. A father bound to a tree, a mother and children hidden in a cave, and a killer who knew these woods well enough to hold a family captive for days without detection. This isn't just another missing persons case. This is the story of the Cowan family massacre, a tragedy that exposed the darkness lurking in Oregon's wilderness and left investigators questioning everything they thought they knew about evil. Welcome to True Crime Theater HQ. For more compelling true crime stories like this, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next release. In the summer of 1974, the forests of southern Oregon echoed with the sound of logging trucks winding their way through ancient timber stands. Behind the wheel of one of those trucks sat 28-year-old Richard Cowan, a man whose calloused hands and weathered smile told the story of someone who had found his place in the world. Each evening he'd return home to White City, where his young wife Belinda waited with their 2 children. At just 22, Belinda embodied the warmth and resilience of a young mother finding her way. She had met Richard at a local diner where she worked as a waitress, and their romance had bloomed quickly among the towering pines and misty valleys of Oregon's wilderness. Their love of the outdoors had only grown stronger with the arrival of their children. 5-year-old David, whose curiosity matched his father's adventurous spirit, and baby Melissa, just 5 months old, whose tiny hands still reached for everything new in her world. The Cowans weren't wealthy by any measure, but they were rich in the things that mattered. Their modest home in White City rang with David's laughter as he played with their faithful basset hound, Droopy, while Belinda cradled Melissa in the rocking chair Richard had built himself. These were the quiet moments that defined their happiness. Like many local families, the Cowans found peace in the wilderness that surrounded their community. The forests weren't just where Richard worked, they were the family's sanctuary. Nearly every weekend, they'd pack up their pickup truck and head into the woods, teaching David about animal tracks and showing baby Melissa the dappled sunlight through the leaves. They knew these lands intimately. Every creek, every trail, every hidden spot where the blackberries grew sweetest. Dissolution was a place where the past didn't have to persist in it. The Labor Day weekend of 1974 hadn't started with plans for adventure. Richard had intended to work on their driveway, a project that had been waiting through the summer heat. But when those plans fell through, Belinda suggested something spontaneous, a camping trip to Carberry Creek near the tiny town of Copper. It was a place they'd visited before, where the water ran clear and cool, and the fishing was good enough to keep David entertained for hours. They packed quickly but thoroughly. Their old canvas tent, Melissa's favorite blanket, the camping stove that had weathered countless family meals under the stars. Droopy jumped into the truck bed, his ears flapping in the wind as they drove away from White City. The late summer sun painted long shadows across the road as they wound their way toward Copper, a town so small it barely registered on maps. The family arrived at Carberry Creek as the day was softening into evening. The campsite sat nestled among towering Douglas firs, with a gentle sound of moving water in the distance. Richard and David set up the tent, while Belinda prepared dinner, baby Melissa watching from her carrier as the family moved through their familiar camping routine. They had no way of knowing that these simple moments, a father showing his son how to stake a tent, a mother warming bottles over a camp stove, a dog exploring the nearby bushes, would soon become the last traces of their normal life. As night fell over Carberry Creek, the family gathered around their campfire. The flames cast dancing shadows through the trees as Richard told David stories about the forests where he worked. Belinda held Melissa close, breathing in the scent of pine needles and wood smoke. Above them, stars began to emerge in the darkening Oregon sky, witnesses to a family's final, peaceful evening together. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright over Carberry Creek, the kind of September morning that makes you grateful to be in the wilderness, with sunlight filtering through the pine branches and the promise of a perfect day ahead. Sunday the morning dawned cussed on the wistful Nevada skies, second from the west of England, just as many campers had done before them. A sunny morning dampened the grief. The store's bell chimed as they entered, David excited about picking out treats, while his father grabbed milk for baby Melissa's bottles. The store owner would later recall their ordinary interactions, a father and son, happy and relaxed, discussing plans for a morning swim. Richard mentioned they'd be heading to Belinda's mother's house for dinner later that day. David clutched a candy bar his father had bought him. They paid for their milk and walked out into the morning sun. It was the last time anyone would see them alive. Back at the campsite, Belinda waited with baby Melissa. The remains of breakfast still sat on their picnic table, coffee cups half empty, the morning stretching ahead with possibilities. No one knows what happened in the hours that followed. No one heard screams, no gunshots. No signs of struggle would be found. As evening approached, Belinda's mother stood in her kitchen, checking her watch again. The roast in her oven was done, the potatoes getting cold. She'd expected them hours ago. Her daughter was always punctual, especially with baby Melissa's feeding schedule. Worry gnawed at her until she couldn't stand it anymore. She got in her car and drove to Carberry Creek, rehearsing the gentle scolding she'd give them for making her worry. What she found at the campsite stopped her heart. The Cowan's pickup truck sat exactly where they'd parked it, keys still in the ignition. Their tent stood undisturbed, sleeping bags laid out as if waiting for their return. On the picnic table, that morning's milk carton sat in the dying sunlight, still cold to the touch. Richard's wallet lay open, $21 in cash untouched. His prized Rolex watch, a gift from his father, rested beside it, ticking away minutes its owner would never see. Belinda's purse hung from a tent pole, containing her ID, money, and baby Melissa's bottles. Their swimsuits were missing from the truck, suggesting a quick trip to the creek. But the creek was empty. The surrounding woods were silent. The next morning, as police began gathering at the campsite, a peculiar sight drew attention at the Copper General store. Droopy, the family's faithful basset hound, stood at the door, scratching to be let in. The same door his family had walked through just 24 hours earlier. His paws were muddy, his eyes anxious. He had returned alone. Word spread quickly through the small community. Volunteers gathered, forming search parties that pushed deep into the surrounding wilderness. They found nothing. No footprints, no torn clothing, no sign of struggle. It was as if the Cowan family had simply stepped out of existence, leaving behind every earthly possession they owned. The initial search revealed only questions. Why would they leave their valuables behind? How could 4 people vanish without a trace? Where had Droopy been, and what had he seen? As darkness fell over Carberry Creek that second night, flashlight beams cut through the trees, accompanied by calls that echoed unanswered through the valleys. The forest held its secrets close, while somewhere in its depths, a tragedy beyond imagination was unfolding. As dawn broke over Oregon's forests that September morning, an army of searchers moved through the wilderness. The whoomp-whoomp of helicopter rotors cut through the morning mist as infrared cameras scanned the endless sea of Douglas firs below. On the ground, search dogs pulled their handlers through undergrowth, while volunteers called out names that echoed unanswered through the valleys. This wasn't just another missing persons case. The disappearance of an entire family, a father, mother, and 2 young children, had struck at the heart of the community. Local hunters abandoned their usual routes to join the search parties. Loggers who worked alongside Richard used their intimate knowledge of the backroads and hidden valleys to probe deeper into the wilderness. Even strangers drove hundreds of miles to help, their cars filling the small parking lot of the Copper General Store, which had become an impromptu command center. The media descended on the quiet town. Reporters from the New York Post stood shoulder to shoulder with local journalists from the Mail Tribune, their cameras capturing the growing desperation in the eyes of family members. Each evening, news broadcasts carried the same message. 4 people had vanished without a trace, leaving behind a perfectly intact campsite, and a mystery that defied explanation. As days turned to weeks, the community's determination only grew stronger. 200 citizens wrote impassioned letters to Oregon Senator Mark Hatfield, pleading for FBI intervention. But their requests hit a bureaucratic wall. Without evidence of kidnapping or interstate crime, federal authorities remained on the sidelines. The weight of the investigation fell squarely on local law enforcement, who interviewed more than 150 people, chasing down every whisper of a lead. Then came the connections that sent a chill through the investigation team. 8 women had vanished from the region under equally mysterious circumstances. As detectives dug deeper, they uncovered a terrifying possibility. These disappearances bore the hallmarks of Ted Bundy, a name that would soon become synonymous with calculated evil. But even this lead, like so many others, led nowhere. The Cowan family's disappearance stood apart, unique in its horror. The seasons changed. Summer's warmth gave way to autumn's chill, and still searchers combed the forests. Thanksgiving passed, then Christmas. Empty chairs at family tables serving as painful reminders of the missing. In White City, the Cowans' home stood silent, their mail piling up, their dog Droopy now living with neighbors who couldn't bring themselves to give up hope. Winter's grip tightened over Oregon. Snow blanketed the search area, erasing any remaining traces that might have led to answers. Even the most dedicated searchers began to feel the weight of futility. But as January turned to February and February to March, one question burned in everyone's minds. How could 4 people simply vanish from a familiar campground, leaving no trace, no clues, and no witnesses? A small hidden alley was just beyond the search area. For 7 long months, the Cowan family's disappearance haunted the region. Their story traveled through hunting camps and truck stops, across dinner tables and police stations. Each retelling added new theories, new possibilities, new fears. But the truth, the dark, devastating truth, remained hidden in the wilderness, waiting to be discovered in a way that would make even the most hardened investigators wish they'd never found it at all. April 12, 1975, began like any other spring morning in Oregon's forests. 2 young gold prospectors made their way through the dense undergrowth near Sturgis Fork, about 7 miles east of where the Cowan family had vanished. They carried their equipment, hoping to find traces of gold in the creek beds. Instead, they uncovered something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. At first, they noticed scattered bones on the forest floor, an unsettling sight that made them pause. But as their eyes traveled upward, they saw something that defied comprehension. A human form bound to a tree. The prospectors fled through the woods, their gold pans abandoned, racing to alert authorities about their grim discovery. Police arrived within hours, securing the area that would become one of Oregon's most devastating crime scenes. Dental records would soon confirm what many had feared. They had found Richard Cowan. The father of 2, the man who knew these forests so well, had met his end tied to a tree in the wilderness he loved. The medical examiner's findings suggested he had died from either stabbing or strangulation, a detail that would later prove crucial to the investigation. But Richard wasn't alone in these woods. As investigators expanded their search around the tree, they noticed an unusual formation of rocks. Behind them lay the entrance to a cave, deliberately concealed from view. What they found inside would shake even the most seasoned officers to their core. There, in the darkness, lay the remains of Belinda, 5-year-old David, and baby Melissa. The medical evidence told a story more horrific than anyone had imagined. Belinda and David had been shot with a .22 caliber rifle. Little Melissa, just 5 months old, had suffered fatal head injuries. The placement and preservation of evidence suggested they had died in the cave where they were found. But perhaps the most disturbing revelation came from the investigators who had searched this exact location 7 months earlier, just days after the family disappeared. One officer remembered the cave vividly. He had checked it personally during the initial search. The cave had been empty then. This meant something unthinkable. The Cowan family had been alive somewhere else while hundreds searched for them. They had been held captive, moved to this location only after the initial search had moved on. The discovery of shell casings near the cave entrance painted a clearer picture of the family's final moments. They had been brought here alive, led through the forest to this remote location. Richard, likely forced to watch what happened to his family, had been tied to the tree where he would take his final breaths. The forest had finally revealed its secret. But the truth it told was darker than anyone had imagined. This wasn't a case of a family getting lost in the wilderness or falling victim to the elements. This was a carefully planned act of evil, executed with a level of calculation that suggested intimate knowledge of the area and the initial search patterns. As investigators processed the scene, the weight of what happened here settled over them like a heavy fog. Somewhere out there, someone had carried this secret for 7 months. Someone had walked free while a family lay hidden in these woods. Someone knew exactly where to look, when to move them, and how to avoid detection. The question was no longer what had happened to the Cowan family, but who could have orchestrated such a methodical act of cruelty. In the small town of Rush, Oregon, just a short drive from where the Cowans met their fate, lived a man named Dwayne Lee Little. At 25 years old, he presented himself as an everyday member of the community, but his past held dark secrets that would soon draw investigators' attention. 4 months before the Cowans disappeared, Little had walked free from Oregon State Penitentiary. His release marked the end of a 10-year sentence for a crime that had shocked the community, the brutal murder of teenager Aura Fee Phipps. The details of that case painted a disturbing picture. Little, who had once been his high school's class president, had attacked an innocent girl during her afternoon horseback ride. Little's history was marked by contradictions. His mother spoke of serious head trauma he'd suffered as a child. Those who knew him described a charming exterior that masked something altogether different beneath. After his release, he'd settled in Medford, found work at a warehouse, and moved in with his parents, their home just minutes from the Carberry Creek campsite. As investigators pieced together the Cowan family massacre, evidence began pointing toward Little. A girlfriend coming forward after their relationship ended revealed a crucial detail. Little owned a .22 caliber rifle, the same caliber used to kill Belinda and David Cowan. This detail carried extra weight because, as a convicted felon, Little was prohibited from possessing firearms. Then came the witness accounts. An elderly couple camping at Carberry Creek on that fateful Sunday described seeing 3 people in a pickup truck: a man, a crying woman, and another man in the back. The truck matched the description of one owned by Little's family. The couple had found the scene disturbing enough to pack up and leave, sensing something wasn't right. The Bluey brotherhood remained in. The investigation uncovered more connections. A cabin owner near the crime scene produced a guest book with an entry that contradicted Little's alibi. He and his parents had signed in on Monday, September 2nd, 9974, placing them in the area during the critical period when the Cowans vanished. This directly challenged their claims of having no knowledge of the family's disappearance. Perhaps the most damning evidence came years later, from behind prison walls. An inmate named Rusty Kelly, who had shared a cell with Little, came forward with a shocking claim. Little had confessed to the Cowan family murders. The details Kelly provided matched evidence that hadn't been made public. When investigators confronted Little about the Cowan murders, they offered him a deal. Take a polygraph test about the killings, and they would overlook his illegal possession of the .22 rifle. His response spoke volumes. He refused. This decision sent him back to prison for violating his parole. But the Cowan case remained officially unsolved. Little's violent nature would surface again in 1980. A pregnant woman named Margie Hunter accepted a ride from him when her car broke down near Portland. She survived his brutal attack, the stabbing, strangling, and assault, and identified Little as her attacker. They had worked together, making her identification unquestionable. This attack earned him a 60-day sentence. Today, Dwayne Lee Little, now 75, serves his time in Oregon State Penitentiary. The evidence against him in the Cowan case forms a compelling pattern. The rifle, the truck sighting, the guest book signature, the confession to his cellmate. Yet questions remain. Could he have controlled and moved an entire family alone? Did he have help? The answers may lie with a man who has nothing left to lose, yet maintains his silence about 4 lives lost in the Oregon wilderness. 50 years have passed since that Labor Day weekend when the Cowan family drove into the Oregon wilderness, never to return home. Their story still echoes through the halls of the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, where case files gather dust but never close. The questions remain as haunting now as they were in 1974. Dwayne Lee Little continues to age behind the walls of Oregon State Penitentiary, serving his 60-year sentence for the attack on Margie Hunter. At 75, he holds on to whatever secrets he may possess about 4 lives lost in the forests he knew so well. The .22 caliber rifle used to kill Belinda and David was never found. The truck that witnesses saw, carrying a crying woman into the darkness, was never located. The full truth about who helped move and hide an entire family remains buried in silence. For the remaining members of the Cowan family, justice feels as distant as ever. Each year they mark the anniversaries, the day the family vanished, the day they were found, the birthdays that 5-year-old David and baby Melissa never got to celebrate. They've watched as Little was convicted for other crimes, but never for the loss that shattered their world. That loss rippled through the community, changing how local families viewed their beloved forests. Parents began warning their children about more than just bears and mountain lions. Campers started checking their surroundings more carefully, wondering if evil could be watching from the trees. The wilderness that had once felt like a sanctuary now held shadows of doubt. The officer's words that opened this story, "I'm sorry the Cowan family did not get justice, and I was a part of their not getting justice," remain a testament to the weight this case still carries. The evidence points to Little, but questions persist. How did one man control an entire family? Who helped him move them after the initial search? Why choose this particular family on this particular weekend? Marty J. Demante, the forests of Oregon keep their secrets well. Somewhere in those woods, perhaps hidden in the undergrowth or buried beneath decades of fallen leaves, lie answers that might finally bring peace to those who still mourn the Cowans. Until then, their story serves as a reminder that evil can wear a familiar face, that justice doesn't always prevail, and that some mysteries refuse to fade with time. For those who still search for answers, for the investigators who never stopped asking questions, and for the family members who continue to seek justice, the case of the Cowan family massacre remains an open wound in Oregon's history, a reminder that behind every unsolved case are real people, real loss, and real questions that deserve answers. Subscribe to True Crime Theater HQ and hit the notification bell to stay informed on stories that matter.